Let's go to Canberra now and catch up with the Nationals leader in the Senate, Bridget McKenzie. Good to talk to you, Bridget.
Great to be with you, Chris.
First up on this plan that the government is considering, we're expecting to hear any day now that they're going to pump taxpayers' money into the households of low-income Australians, of pensioners perhaps, and of small businesses to help them pay for the escalating power bills they're raising. I mean, in the end, you're going to have to support this sort of subsidy, aren't you?
Well, Chris, we've been really concerned that this government's come to power without any plan to deal with the cost of living crisis that Australians are feeling, whether it's electricity prices, petrol prices, their mortgages, food and groceries going through the roof. We're also obviously in a very high inflationary environment, and pumping the economy in this way needs to be very delicately done at this sort of high inflationary environment. We want to see, obviously, the downward pressure on power prices to come about by increasing supply. And Premier Daniel Andrews I saw him on Insiders on Sunday. Yes, I confess I watched it. Saying that he wanted, a gas reservation here on the East Coast without actually simultaneously ensuring Victorian gas supplies would be part of it. The only way, whether it's eggs, milk, any commodity that you get prices down is actually by increasing the supply of that good. And so we are hoping that they will have a sensible policy on increasing supply and working with the states to untap not just the Narrabri project and those that are ready to go, but stores that are in states like my home state of Victoria. Yeah,
they've got to do that. It'll take time, though, and it shouldn't have got to this, and they've messed it up. But in the end, if they're going to hand out some money, and despite those inflationary concerns, you're going to have to support it, aren't you? Because there will be pensioners this summer choosing between food and the air conditioner.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the detail yet, Chris, but you're right. People are severely feeling the pinch, and it is the more vulnerable in our communities that will feel the impact of Labor's indecision around these policies the most. And so look forward to seeing the detail. We haven't yet, and we'll be making a decision as soon as we can.
OK, on The Voice, we had David Littleproud on here last night. And my central contention with him is you've been calling for more detail on The Voice. It's not forthcoming, and yet now you're saying you're opposing it anyway. How can you oppose something when you're still awaiting the detail?
Well, Chris, we have got more detail. The government told us they're going to follow the flawed and failed ATSIC model. They've also let us know that that's all the detail we're going to get. And so given that is all the detail we're going to get, we're not prepared to support The Voice. And this isn't just a flippant decision the National Party has made. We've been consulting not just our local communities, but indeed both the Yes and the No campaign through an internal process. And this is the decision we've come to. And,
so no matter what the detail,
lightly, Chris.
Yeah, no matter what detail comes forward, you won't change your mind. You've got the West Australian Nats dissenting now, and Andrew Gee, a former minister in your own party.
Well, as I said, Chris, we've gone through a process internally of the 20 seats across this country where most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders live. 20 out of 20 are rural and regional seats. They're also where the most vulnerable and marginalised of our Aboriginal Australians live, and we want to change their outcomes into the future. We
How
don't
are you going to do
believe that the Voice to Parliament will. Well, Chris, in our time in government, we set up the indigenous procurement policy, $5.3 billion that went to tens of thousands of local small businesses employing Indigenous Australians as a way of economically empowering local Indigenous communities. We want to see the dial change. We don't believe this will, and we've just made that in a respectful way. We've made that decision as a political movement that represents most of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in this country through our local MPs and senators.
Now, when you're in government, of course, less than a year ago, you were also proceeding with a project to legislate an Indigenous voice to Parliament. And as part of that process and consultation, you're incorporating the ATSIC election model. And that's all there in the report that was produced under your government. And yet now you're saying a reference to that ATSIC election model is enough for you to scarper what the government might propose?
Well, again, Chris, constitutional change is something that shouldn't be done lightly. It shouldn't be done flippantly. And the vague words that the government has put forward, which essentially hand all the power to a parliament, which in our experience is the National Party, doesn't put rural, regional and remote Australians first, doesn't take into consideration their needs and issues in a real and tangible way, is the wrong way to go about this. I think we should be proud as a country.
Those people who are sceptical are worried about the supremacy of the parliament. You just said the parliament will have all the power.
But the Constitution gives the Australian people the power, and putting forward a constitutional amendment that is vague in its application. Constitutional change should be about detail. That's our founding document. It is one that gives ultimate power to the Australian people. I think we need to be very proud of the indigenous voices that we have in our federal parliament right now. 11 MPs and senators, not all from the left, Conservative, Liberal, Greens, Labor Party and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, obviously, in my own party room from the CLP in the Northern Territory, all bringing their own lived experience to the parliament, to a whole raft of legislative changes that the government's bringing forward. So I think that is how the Indigenous voice should actually come to parliament. It's actually replicating what we have actually all voted for as one nation, as all Australians, sending those Indigenous voices here today.
OK, so that's it. The Nationals check out of this debate, not interested in this debate and how the referendum case goes forward, just outright opposition.
No, Chris, we've engaged and consulted on the ground in our communities. So Mark Colton, for instance, he's got more Indigenous and Torres Strait Islanders in his seat of Parkes than he does farmers. He has been on the ground talking to them over the last couple of months about what they think about the voice. Our own leader has the seat of Maranoa. He's been talking to his own local community. We have not done this lightly. We're not talking only to elite Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We're actually talking on the ground to the men and women in our own communities who want to see a better future for their families, who want to see great local jobs in their local community. And many of them haven't even heard of this proposition called The Voice. And that's actually been brought to our party room and we're acting on it.
Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Always.
Senator Bridget McKenzie there, live from Canberra.